welcome to the regular meeting of the City of Petaluma's Chair Committee, sorry, Street Tree Committee.
Recording in progress.
Okay, thank you, and call to order. Roll call.
Cover.
Here.
We'll start over. Cover,
Here.
Formby,
Here.
Racketson,
Here.
Obeyed. Here. McCurling
Here.
and DeLuco.
And we move on to general public comment. Seeing that we have no general public comment, we move on to approval of minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from February 15th?
I'll put a motion to approve the minutes.
A second?
Second.
All in favor? All right. Public hearings and matters for consideration. Discussion of Arbor Day events at McNair Park on April 29th, 2023, and a nature walk with Relief Petaluma on April 30th, 2023. Not a project pursuant to CEQA guideline section 15378. I don't know what that means.
So generally, that's a requirement of the Brown Act. If it's a CEQA regulation, it would deal with construction projects. So you'll probably see this show up on every one of our agenda items, but we're generally not pursuant to CEQA.
Thank you.
So this is, I just wanted to bring back to the committee members Arbor Day, because we did decide that we were going to do the tree planting at McNair Park. We did not have enough time to discuss timing last meeting, as well as the nature walk with Relief Petaluma on that Sunday following the tree planting on Saturday. So I wanted to bring the matter up for discussion for timing and what worked for the committee members that day. Staff will, of course, be on hand to prep. I did check in with my staff. We will have one native tree to replace, which is that oak that went down in McNair Park in that first major storm after the new year. But the recommendation is that for my staff is that we'll probably look to plant between 2 to 3 trees that day. So, not a major planting, but we at least wanted to do more than one in the replacement for. But timing wise, bringing it up to discussion to the committee members, we would prefer maybe a late morning planting, but I didn't know what would work for the best for everybody. So I'd leave it to committee members to decide what you'd like to see that day and when you can make it.
Thank you. Just open it up for discussion.
April 29th is Saturday.
Yes. And I know we're a little bit rusty because it's been a few years where we had to have these plantings where it was one person. We tried to keep people away, but we do want to make this a celebration. So just thoughts on that. I did also speak to Rihanna Frank to see if we can kind of tie in with what they're doing for Earth Day, but it sounds like they're going to push that a little bit further into May, I think is what she was saying. So we're kind of going to maybe be the beginning event of some Earth Day things. But typically we invite the public to be there as well as the council and tree committee members. So it's kind of a nice celebration. And I just, I wanted to kind of bring up to timing for the committee members when all of you can think you can be there. So, well, I could say, let's do it at 8 a.m. If that doesn't work for the committee members, I want to make sure we have the time appropriate so it's most accessible to all of you.
Can you remind us, please, of the itinerary for that day and what the events are so that we can figure out, given the amount of people that might be interested in those events, whether it's best to go early or between two particular events, etc.
Sure. So that day for us, we're only having the tree planting as an Arbor Day celebration. So there is nothing else. The Earth Day celebrations that we're going to start earlier in the week have been pushed to May. So we don't actually have to consider the timing. We'll just be the kickoff of what will be Earth Day events for the city. So timing wise is completely up to the committee members. What works for the majority, I would say, is I would ask committee members to consider.
Darren?
Well, for that planting on the Saturday, I would think like 10 or 11 a.m. is kind of a sweet spot before people are really off doing it. And then it gives plenty of time. And I don't know, what the weather will be, but it won't be super hot potentially. So I think 10 or 11 is a great spot. That would be my inclination. And I know last time we kind of went back and forth and all around with ideas, Arbor Day ideas. I think I like what we settled on. So this is kind of an Arbor Day weekend. It seems like a planting at McNear Central. And I know previously Commissioner McGarlane said, let's not have two events fighting with each other. So I think separate days is smart. I think involving Relief is smart. I guess on Relief's end, I'm assuming they would be game for this kind of thing. You've probably already contacted them.
Yes, so and Relief is gonna lead the walk on Sunday as well. So we have two events going on, which is really exciting for me. I really love the idea of that educational component and kind of walking the community through the work that they've done on the east side of town with that nature corridor. So Saturday will be the planting and then Sunday will be the walk. And I have not talked to them about timing of that walk yet, so I can go back to them for the Sunday walk if there is a time that works best for the committee and who can be present. Maybe everybody can't make both events, but if some of you can make one or the other, that'd be great, just to have representation at both events. I plan to be at both, but I know that not everybody can be at both, so want to be cognizant of everybody's time too and capacity to take these both on, since we're moving to two events instead of one.
Well, and in that vein, is this something we're thinking about? Not that we have to, having like a booth to describe what we do, or is it just informal? People show up. I guess what level of like marketing and then formality for the event itself? What do we have?
I would say that we could have information there. It's really whatever the committee would like it to be. I want to support. I was going to invite Relief to have their table. They do tabling, they have a beautiful display, a lot of information. They have people who share information, especially with the work that they've done and, trying to gather more volunteers for future plannings and things that they have moving forward. So I was going to invite them to be there on Saturday as well as Sunday. They'll probably have somewhere where we check in. I'm sure they'll have a table that they normally do, but on Saturday I was going to invite them to have a table.
Taryn?
Thank you. Another question, could you please remind us?
Excuse me, Committee Member Obaid, if you could just speak into the
Thank you.
microphone and just a reminder for all committee members. Thanks.
Okay. Can you please remind us, are the holes pre-dug? Are we getting them, will they be dug that morning? Are we doing the planting? Or if somebody like City Council Member Jordan Shribs is going to be there, so we can estimate doing the planting so that we can get a sense of how much time it will take. If Shribs is doing it, it'll probably be done in 10 minutes.
So generally for Arbor Day, your park staff preps everything. So everything's ready to go. The holes dug, the trees there. So we ask everybody to come to help fill, kind of the soil around the tree, but it's really shepherded by the parks team.
So how long do you think people will be there?
Max 30 minutes, Bill. I think you probably were there at our last, right? It wasn't that long at all. We only did one tree, but it was before we did the Wiseman. So last year's was Wiseman's relief planning, which obviously was a whole day. But previous to that, when the city staff just preps everything and everything's ready to go.
So is it reasonable to think like 10 to 12, sort of a window for that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I like the idea of having Relief have a table there, especially if they're going to be doing something on Sunday.
Okay. 10 to noon. And I will get, I'll work with the city communications team to get the word out through our city channels as well as our rec channels so that we can, get as many people there. I think it'd be important to invite the community to the event. Okay, so if everybody would put it on their calendars for 10 to noon on the 29th, and then the 30th, I will get you the information for the walk. Thank you.
I didn't mean to just make that decision, but I know,
No.
Bill, were you going to say something?
Well, I'll back up that decision. Yeah, 10 to noon. I'll probably be a few minutes late, but I have a meeting from 9 to 10. So I'll be there after that.
Great.
Thank you.
And then for those kind of events, is it normal to have any kind of city booth presence or anything? Like, here's the parks team and here's what we do, or hey, we're tree committee. We exist for the public to.
In the past, we have, I think because of COVID, the last 3 years, we have not because we're trying to avoid having any public gatherings. But yes, absolutely. So I haven't yet explored with the rec team to see if we'd want to have more than just, curiously like some information out there. So we'll work and see if any other departments want to be present to just kind of, get information out there on what the city does. But if the tree committee would like to helm a table and have some information out there, I'm also happy to support that.
I was just going to say about the heritage tree list, which has been updated, right? Is it? And so it might be nice to have, I don't know if we have information about access to that or if we have copies of it, or, it'd be nice to sort of let people know that that's a thing. I think a lot of people don't know that, so it certainly seems relevant.
Maybe we could format it.
Yeah,
Maybe we could-
Excuse me, Chris.
Pardon me, Roger. Maybe we could format it as a one-pager, a half sheet, maybe one of the
Maybe one of the scan emblems on it so people can scan it to go to the full list as a shared Google Doc or something. But first part of my comment was maybe we could create a little handout that condenses what the list is, maybe make it a half page, full color to facilitate people getting that information.
Okay. See what I can pull together.
Roger?
Just a question, I have the digital update from Mr. Baldwin. I have not given it to anybody, nor do I know who to give it to, but seems like that's what we should use.
Sure, you could share that with me. That should go to planning. Because planning actually has oversight of the heritage tree list, but I can forward that on, Roger. You can send that to me. But that's a good idea. I will see what I can pull together to have a table for the heritage tree list and some other tree information there at the planting.
Thank you. So do we ask for public comment now?
Yes.
Yeah. Is there any public comment?
I have a question. Do you need help planting the trees? I'm involved with a 4-H group, Golden Hills 4-H. I don't know if you need kids to help plant the trees or you guys.
Is your microphone on?
Oh, hit the button. There's a button.
under the post-it.
Sorry.
You, and then if you'd like.
There you go.
Hi,
Please tell us your name.
I'm Carolyn Lachera, and I'm involved with Golden Hills 4-H. And I don't know if you all plant the trees or if you need help planting trees. I could go to my 4-H group and ask about that as a community service.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Thank you. We'll move on to the Tree Ordinance Ad Hoc Committee, final update on meeting with Planning Department. I'm sorry, I'm confused. Was that something that was on my agenda?
That was something.
I'm sorry.
These were the mystery notes I was telling you about before the meeting. Yeah, so this was the final meeting of the tree ordinance ad hoc, which at the end here I'm going to lobby for the creation of something similar as the city navigates really what's going to be an extensive process based on my feedback from this meeting. And I did get feedback that the set of notes that was attached to the agenda was not very robust. It was not a well-formatted presentation. So that has been taken into consideration. So what we're looking at is just a set of meeting notes from a meeting between myself, as kind of the last remaining member of the ordinance ad hoc, and city planning staff. This was Heather Hines and Kelsey from planning, whose last name I'm forgetting right now. And this was a pretty broad discussion of everything related to an ordinance. We've had this discussion at Tree Committee many times, all the different layers that go into this, and really how the ordinance is one part of our urban forest plan. What was nice to hear is that planning is of the same mind. And, the original mission of the ordinance ad hoc was to find everywhere that trees are discussed. There was a lot of focus made on Chapter 17 of our IZO about tree preservation. That is not the only place trees are discussed in our municipal code and in our zoning ordinances. So the task of the ordinance was to really consolidate where all those mentions are and pass that on to planning as one resource they're going to use in generating a new ordinance and really try to unify tree policy in the city, which is a massive task. I don't think we could do it if we weren't doing it alongside the whole general plan process and the IZO update that goes along with that, right? We're really going to be pulling apart all of zoning code and kind of updating it all. So this is the perfect time to unify how we deal with trees in all these different scenarios. So the first part of the notes here talk about what resources planning has at their disposal in thinking about putting together a new tree policy or unifying tree policy. There's a draft tree technical manual. I wasn't sure if this was provided from tree committees past, which Cindy, you're shaking your head yes. Resources from tree advisory committee, myself, and now council member Shribs had sent a lot of information about best practices of kind of my versions of different tree ordinances. So they took all of that. They have all the resources that Relief has provided, which I think were kind of the basis of a lot of tax resources. And then ordinances from jurisdictions and exemplar ordinances. Cities like San Jose, Claremont have great tree policies, tree ordinances, and then any of the public input. So they were just saying, here's this massive collection of data, feedback, things to consider. And I think they're at the very early stages of taking all of that and trying to translate it into what our tree policy is. Just on Monday night, our city council had an update on all of our top 10 priorities for council for the year, which this tree ordinance was one of those priorities. I think we're quickly getting into discussion, though, of what the scope of that would be. If this is just revising the one Chapter 17 we already have on file, which there's a lot we could do there. I mean, namely adding definitions right now, things like drip line, healthy tree, unhealthy tree, all that is undefined in our ordinance. And right now our ordinance as it stands only applies to discretionary development proposals. So there's huge changes that could be made to really improve that. Based on this conversation with planning, conversations with TAC, we're really looking for something kind of broader than just updating that one ordinance. So that would be a discussion with council to, are we updating that priority to just redoing a tree preservation ordinance, or are we really trying to put together an urban forestry plan, which a key component of that I think would be including an arborist, and I'll get to that. So just in these rough notes, the next part they've kind of organized, and I didn't even take these notes, so I'm not sure I contributed very much other than showing up. Planning put together this list of notes. So these are some of the broad questions we've all thought about. I didn't get the impression that they've come to definitive answers on some of this. One of the biggest issues when you think about tree policy in the city is, are we going to enforce anything or have any say in people's trees on private property? That opens a whole ball of wax into how you interface with people. I think it was Councilmember Healy on Monday night was very wary of trying to enforce anything on private property. There are cities that do it very well, but then that kind of flows into some of these notes. Actually, at the bottom of that section, it talks about a dashboard on the city's website. So this was kind of more of a discussion of how you would implement any kind of private property tree permits. And it was like, okay, do we want, right now with planning permits or building permits, there's an online database that anyone can access. Your neighbor starts building, you can check if they have a permit. Would we want something similar for trees? If your neighbor starts cutting down a tree, is there an EnerGov database where you could query the address, see if they have a permit on file? Would that get out of hand pretty quickly with enforcement? So then there's enforcement questions. Who do you call if there's a tree violation? It kind of circles right back to my impression that, okay, we need an arborist or we need some point person to deal with these things. And would one person be enough? So that's one huge issue, is how do we expand this, if we do, to folks with trees on private property? And you see in her notes here, previous general plan mentions a city arborist. So that was the next huge discussion, is so much of any tree ordinance, who's responsible for enforcement? And, you know, with our current ordinance, we have tree preservation plans, removal and mitigation plans for development projects. Who's signing off on those? Right now, planning is, and there's a lot of flexibility in their process for how they approve those. Who actually reviews it? Who signs off on it? And as Heather Hines explained to me, they leave that broad and don't stipulate exactly that administrative process to give them the flexibility they need. I think we could definitely put a point person in there, though, who would be the final stamp to say, yes, this plan passes muster based on my experience as an arborist, not just relying on the developer's arborist to say this is a great plan. And then our planning staff, who Heather admitted are not necessarily arborists or specialists in trees. You'll actually see in her notes where it talks about development to permits discretionary review. She put forward maybe having an on-call arborist firm that the city partners with for peer review of tree removal and preservation plans for development. If we had a third party, we'd have to pass on the costs of bringing in this other arborist team, or do we just have someone internal? And I think from a couple of these job duties that I've already mentioned, private property, reviewing, having this new review process for discretionary review, there's easily, I think we could have an arborist. I think there's enough work here for an arborist, not necessarily having to go to a third party on every development project. But these are all questions that they're looking at, and that was really the upshot of this meeting, was a lot of these huge questions they're still wrestling with. I think what came through at the city council meeting, Councilmember Shribs is a great voice for the trees now on council, made it very clear that he thinks we absolutely need an arborist on staff. May is usually where we have our budget workshop. I don't know if it's going to be May 9th again this year or what day it's going to be, but really that's a huge piece of this in my mind. So I'm going to recruit folks to come to that workshop. Last year I was the only one here in person, but to come to that workshop and try to put a bug in their ear about, look, we need to bookmark monies for an arborist position. In discussing this with Heather and planning staff, they shied away from committing to an urban forestry department. That was kind of something we've talked about, is look, we should have a department who's reviewing these permits for private property. I think we had a vision of what this could be. And she was like, look, a whole department, that's a big ask for just this budget, fitting it all in there, especially when it's not proven, right? So the revenue generation from these permits from private property, that would be really the biggest revenue generation. And so what can that support? It's kind of easiest to start with a single individual to be the city's arborist. And then we would have that process of defining exactly what their role is. And it's not clear to me that's even established via ordinance, right? That would probably have to be something that council would approve, is having this new position. And who knows, there might be an RFP the city has to put out. And we would kind of enter this new position of creating a new staff position and getting that filled. And then, part of this discussion also talked about our list of protected trees. Right now, we have a pretty limited scope of what is protected. And just talking before the meeting with Chair Formby about the different strategies you could have for deciding what species are protected, or do we protect everything but then exclude or exempt certain species from that same protection because they're nuisance species, things of that nature. And then, so moving on just from these kind of broad topics of consideration, status and anticipated milestones. So this was the biggest music to my ears. City is looking at this holistically and not just one chapter of code. To me, that almost necessitates having council update their priority to be this bigger urban forestry plan, where updating ordinances and municipal code is one part, having an arborist is another part, codifying our tree technical manual is another piece, education and outreach. So this is kind of a broader plan. I think that's really in the works. And like I said, with the general plan, this is really the time to do that. But that's what planning staff has in mind as well. They're currently reviewing compiled resources. So I don't think they've started drafting anything yet. I think they're reviewing everywhere we already talk about trees, all the stuff that we've thrown at them, everything that Relief has provided them. And, part of this process, I would love to see Tree Committee have a role as they're going through this brainstorming and early drafts. I think the Tree Committee should be involved throughout. I think that does a couple of things. First of all, that keeps us engaged and we don't just get, a final version that they've worked on, or a draft, but like a pretty finalized version they've put together without having input up to that point. Because it's pretty hard to make changes once they've drafted a whole set of ordinances and a whole plan kind of hard for us to take in all that information and then say, you know, oh, we want massive changes. And they very much thought that as well. That I liked hearing that. Heather does want to engage the tree advisory committee the whole way. And I think there is a role here. This was kind of the final meeting of our ordinance ad hoc, but I think there is a role for some kind of policy or ordinance ad hoc to really help us kind of nudge, not that staff needs a nudge, but kind of nudge things along and say, hey, can you present what you have so far, even if it's just discussions internally, so we can contribute? And whether it's, you know, at an actual tree committee meeting, or if it's just that ad hoc, 2 or 3 members of an ad hoc meeting with planning staff to say, you know, how far along are we? You know, what drafts are we looking at? What cities are you looking at, to keep us engaged? And like I said, Heather and staff were very much in favor of that, of keeping tree committee engaged. And you can see that in the notes there. Staff will consult with TAC for feedback on draft ordinances. But I think what I'd like to have is not just feedback on that draft copy, but kind of every step along the way. And then they talk about having community engagement once there's a public review draft. In my mind, we're really far from that, especially if we're looking at a bigger picture than just one ordinance. And then she talks about the ultimate adoption process and communicating with us along the way. So what's nice is we're in at the early stage talking about this. I think a lot of our discussions, and like I said, I kind of went overboard and wrote this like really not proper ordinance and sent it and just kept pressing. And it let them know that, hey, tree committee is here. We really want to be involved in this process. This is really important. And it's kind of started this partnership that hopefully will move on. And I think the timeline right now is December 2024 is my understanding for a lot of municipal code changes. So it seems like a lot of time. I don't think that's a lot of time for as big a scope as we're talking about. So yeah, that's where we are. And like I said, I'd love to see us form an ordinance to really keep that partnership going and alive, and kind of be a touch point every couple weeks to see how things are developing. So that's the meeting.
Thank you, Darren. Go ahead, Roger. Microphone. I have to say mine doesn't go off either.
Oh yeah, mine's stuck on.
Well, you can speak loudly and we can hear you. Huh? Borrow your mic. Borrow your mic? Mine's not working either.
Oh, okay. I agree with what you're saying in general. I mean, my only concern is that, in my understanding of an arborist, is not necessarily an urban designer or a streetscape designer or anybody has a concept of what he's doing. He's a technically capable person of understanding trees, what works, what doesn't work, what's wrong with them, how to repair them. But they're not necessarily great designers. In some cases, they're killers because take it out. So I'd be a little careful about putting the world in the arborist control. I think he needs direction, or he or she needs direction, and more of a planning direction. And then technically the arborist can contribute, or the landscape architect can contribute. Someone needs to be leading the show. For one, I think the city's policy to date has kind of been, everybody's had trees on your property. We don't want any responsibility for street trees, so we won't maintain them. You take care of them. Whatever happens, happens, and we don't really give a damn. That policy has got to change. If it doesn't change, we're not going to get anywhere. So I think, there's got to be issues about public trees, public property, private trees handled entirely differently. It might be too late in many cases to change much because it's private property. But there's got to be an approach to how do we encourage private property people to take care of trees, to plant trees, to add trees, neighborhood movements to improve neighborhoods. I mean, there's a whole bunch of levels that we need to approach positive tree attitude, but the arborist is not going to be able to pull that off. So I think, first of all, we got to change city policy, and it's got to go up and down from whoever makes the policy about both existing trees, heritage trees, and new trees, and new projects with certain requirements to planting trees that go along with it. Street trees, setbacks for parkways, a bunch of issues. Then I think you need to go into key projects. You know, what are some projects that we can do? Like how about Petaluma Boulevard? Or how about McDowell? Or pick some boulevard streets that have visual impact and have a city policy of like, we're going to demonstrate the positive application of this ordinance here, or in a park, or in a, you know, but some way define opportunities to demonstrate what we're talking about and show an example of success. Because right now I hear everybody's talking out of both sides of their mouth in terms of protecting trees because we have limited ability to do that. Punishing owners, we have limited ability to do that. I mean, the whole thing is just not very efficient or effective. So I would encourage a holistic approach to this, and I like what you're doing, and I think it really needs top-down attention.
Any other comments? Go ahead, Bill.
I could use that mic too, that'd be great.
I'm gonna try to unmute all of you really quick, see if I can do it from this.
Now are your mics working?
It is.
Okay, so do you want to try to mute them and see if it works?
Now I can't.
It does
yeah, I
not.
still can't mute.
This one works now.
Okay, so I'm going to mute you really quick again and then see if you can unmute.
Well, that was a great recap, Darren. Agree with a lot of what you said there, but most of all, like really very positive that we're taking this on as a city to revamp the tree ordinance. It's like super important that we address what I believe is a fairly broken model. I mean, I think the results are what they are. Like you look at our streets and you see like vast stretches of like very streetscapes without trees, and you know, stretches where it's hot, where we need more shade, where it would be much more beautiful with a large canopy tree. And so I often like come back to our streets and our street trees, and I feel like it's important to sort of figure out like why, you know, we don't have more trees in our streets. And I think some of that's the ordinances, but some of that's the human nature, and you know, trees are expensive to maintain, and sometimes it's easier to make the choice to cut down a tree, and we don't want that. But that's, again, that's sort of what's been happening. And so I think we kind of need to do some really like some strength and weakness analysis or whatever it is to figure out how we got to where we are on our streets. And I do kind of come back to that arborist. I feel like somebody that can speak for the trees, but also speak for the streetscapes, to have more trees on the streets, that realizes, that you know, occasionally we're going to have some concrete out of balance and things like that, but it's, you know, puts a priority on our tree, to preserve our trees. So let's see. So a year or two back, somebody from Relief presented to the tree committee and did a pretty interesting a job telling us about what's happening in other communities in Marin, where I think that arborists are paid for through the permits and fees associated with it. And so maybe that gentleman could re-educate us on that, or maybe hopefully he's talking to planning. So anyway, very positive, very exciting. Sorry to kind of get on the soapbox around street trees. Feel like there's a lot of things we can do though to really improve the situation. So look forward to getting involved. Thanks.
Thank you. Sharon?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
You should be able to unmute now when you're done.
Okay, thank you, Darren. I appreciate both your guys' comments. We definitely need on staff, we do have some quote-unquote arborists on staff right now, but they're not really arborists. They're trained like on paper to get a certificate, but they're not practiced. And evidently with the few people that I've spoken with, that makes all the difference. So I would support, first of all, let me back up for a second here. I'm pulling up, I pulled up the project plan for the tree ordinance that was presented Monday night city council meeting. And the plan is backwards. They have assembled information that has been provided to them, handed over with all the great work that the committee has done in the past couple of years, and Relief as well. But their next thing is they're writing the ordinance. They're writing the ordinance starting 2 weeks from now, and we are not on their plan to see it until another 3 weeks after, not until whatever that is, June, start of Q3. So it's backwards. And if we want what I'm hearing we all want, which is holistic approach, transformative, turn this ship around because too many trees are getting chopped down. We do need an ad hoc, and we need it now, and it needs to meet regularly. We need an ordinance involves three things. It is a new rule in place. That rule has to have policy attached to it, such as who is going to make the rule or enforce the rule. And if the rule isn't after the rule is enforced, what are the penalties and who is going to enforce it? So it's a robust, full behavioral sort of a accommodating model, understanding how behavior happens out there and addressing each step in the process. So we do need something cultural, a holistic shift, and it needs to absolutely be written into IZO Chapter 24. The tree committee needs to have a seat at the table for so many decisions that are being made all out there in other committees, other commissions, other boards, city council. Things are happening that touch on trees that we're never seeing the light of day. And with regard to the permit fees, the models are out there, given I just had a roof, just did a fence, I did the whole permit thing on the website. There's that. There's also, if people have questions, we can just employ the customer service type chat box that opens up whenever we're on any website out there, in the year 2023, that says, are you sure this is a problem that is in the purview? Is this? Have you tried this? Have you done that? So that we kind of filter out people and don't bog down our staff. A lot of this can be handled in an automated fashion, which I know Darren could probably talk about better than I can. But in terms of permit fees for chopping down a tree, we really need to think hard about that. I think my thought is, of course, I don't know, if we make those fees too high, people are going to complain. People are going to resent it. We're going to have a barrier in terms of sentiment and shifting the culture in our community, as well as a barrier to people wanting to plant new trees. I am a market researcher trained, and I've had lots of qualitative sorts of conversations with people. And a big problem actually is that a long time ago when my subdivision went in 1960, they put the wrong tree in the wrong place. I have a little, a 30 by 20 foot front yard, and they put 3 sycamores in a row, not 10 feet away from the house. There's only one still standing, but there was also a pine tree out the kitchen window. And a redwood tree that's 100 feet tall just went down in my neighborhood. So I think that's why a lot of being cut down, but also I will say culturally, a lot of people just aren't thinking it through. And that's where what we get to later in the agenda, communications, community outreach campaign can help. But I think those are all of my comments right now. I wholeheartedly support an ad hoc to funnel all of this stuff in and apply it to this train that's already rolling down the wrong track. We need to stop it, get it on the right track, else it's gonna be good money thrown down the tubes. Thank you.
Any more comment, Darren?
Just going off, this reminded me of a couple points of our discussion that weren't in the notes. One big one, to Roger's point about actual design, right? Forestry and urban design. This committee has people who have been in that trade and profession that would be able to really have great feedback on design. But as Taryn said, we don't get brought tree plans, removal and preservation, or planting plans. And I know planning staff said, we're not sure in the enabling legislation for your committee if that's a role that you guys can have. So that may be kind of a higher level change to try to integrate. Now, like Bike and Ped Committee, Advisory Committee, they see Bike and Ped plans before a development even comes to planning. So it would make sense to me to try to increase Tree Committee's scope because it's not staff, right? We cost nothing to have us look at it, and we have folks who are in the trade who can help make designs better, which ultimately is the point of discretionary review bodies, is to help make designs better. And I think trying to expand the scope of the Tree Committee, we talked a lot about, keeping Tree Committee engaged. And that was one of my big asks was, can you bring tree plans? And from my niscient position, I don't know what it looks like when our city approves a tree plan. Who looks at it? Who signs off on it? How do we get integrated into that process before it goes to planning? So that's one huge element that was part of our discussion. And for care and maintenance of street trees and public trees, that would probably be a public works discussion, right, Cindy, on who's responsible. I'm not sure that would show up in an ordinance or not.
I don't know. It would depend on where the street tree lies, I think is really the question of that, but Public Works definitely would be in the discussion because they have purview over certain spaces.
Yeah, and likewise with new planting projects where the city could kind of lead and say, look, we've now taken responsibility for street trees. We're going to do this amazing planting along this corridor. We're going to consult the tree advisory committee to figure out what a great design would be, what species to use. I think that's something that's eminently attainable. It's just figuring out what pieces have to move in the right place to do that, and really comes back to budget. And so we just unpacked all the reasons why permitting a private property is just like a can of worms to open, because there's so many things to consider. Number one, it has to be easy and cheap enough where you have voluntary compliance. Where people look and they say, oh, it's $70 to apply for this permit. Fine, I'll do that without much stress. And then if you get enough of those, that's really the only part of this model, from my understanding, other than kind of working with developers. That's another fee generation part of this. So that's really when we talk about how would we get the funds to kind of push forward with plantings and with maintenance of public trees, where can we find pockets of money to do that? And then there might be grants, state and federal money. That gets into a whole discussion of how we could fund these kind of efforts. But yes, I definitely think, and I don't know, Cindy, when it's appropriate to talk about, if that'd be at next meeting, putting together a policy ad hoc, because these are a lot of ideas. And if a team could meet and either discuss with planning, get guidance from planning on, hey, is there an element you want us to research? Is that something we could bring up at this meeting, or would we kind of put that on the agenda for next meeting, a policy ad hoc?
Then it would have to be agendized.
Okay. Well, I think that's a huge step, because there's so much swirling around right now. We really need guidance on kind of what the process is to implement a lot of these ideas.
Roger?
Yeah, I support that. Maybe the tree committee can be the leader of the arborist. So maybe there's a way that we can staff this group to be experts in leading the arborists or directing the arborists, and reviewing plans. But somehow I think the resources here are not used for much, except within our own little world. The other is, there's got to be a way of dealing with homeowners. Because to me, the biggest issue is neighborhoods that have street trees or mature trees are attractive. Neighborhoods that don't are less attractive. Property values is low. The whole thing could be an education to this neighborhood. Say, okay, if you plant trees, you save on heating or cooling. You save on you increase your property value, you know, so on and so on. All the advantages of them participating in climate change in a positive way. And maybe there's an incentive. Maybe PG&E pays them, gives them a discount. We should be able to rope them into this problem because we're saving them, you know, energy by planting trees. So there's got to be a way of approaching a homeowner with incentives, not punishments as much. Because I'm not so much concerned about cutting trees down, although it's an issue, I agree. But I think planting more trees is a bigger priority in my mind. And then projects like Petaluma Boulevard South. I mean, how in the world did that ever get done without anybody involved with the engineering department or public works? It's a shame. It was an opportunity lost for 40 years now. It'll be a long time before we come back to that. It could have been so easily tweaked with bulb outs and remove some of the parallel parking that is unneeded in this industrial zone and made it an attractive street out of it with very little extra money. And why that wasn't even part of any city process is unbelievable, but it wasn't. So it needs to start being part of the process. Every engineering road plan should have a landscape architect or forester involved in influencing that.
Are you finished? Yeah, go ahead, Taryn.
Thank you for that comment, Roger. The public was at the city council saying, please include trees, please include trees, please include trees. But no, Public Works did not have the flexibility in their disposition to go back to their plans and include trees. And that just underscores why we need to get ahead of this ordinance. Because unless you have the community and impassioned members of the community that volunteer their time for something like a tree committee, you cannot really expect people that don't even live in our town to share the same sort of an outlook and perhaps the same sort of level of care. And that's why we need to get ahead of this ordinance so that we don't end up with a tree ordinance that's like a Petaluma Boulevard South road diet.
Go ahead.
Well, just really quickly, I think that's why, you know, when we think study sessions, it's something in planning that I love, although they may not be as structured as they should be. Expanding the committee scope to be involved in study sessions where there might be projects that involve trees or have the potential to add trees. I don't know what that looks like to bring forward a public works project and say, we're redoing this part of a major street, tree committee. You know, what do you think? Should we add trees here? I don't know the mechanism to do that, but I think we need to explore what that scope expansion looks like. And that's why I think a policy ad hoc to guide the ordinance, but also to figure out ways to integrate, you know, feedback from the tree committee into broader projects is a big thing mechanically. I don't know, Cindy, if you know ways where that could be done.
So just because this is in the comments, I'll quickly address it because you asked me a question. That's a broader discussion on the scope of the tree committee that it was put forth by an ordinance. So it would have to be council that made the changes, right? Council has the power to make those changes and they're the only body within the city.
So I would say, you know, we could form a policy ad hoc and then, you know, lobby council both for more involvement for tree committee generally. And then I think to Taryn's point, I think it makes sense for us to lobby for council members to update their priority list to, because right now I can tell based on the Gantt chart that they showed for it's just updating the tree preservation ordinance, chapter 17. That was what was put to them. And I think if we want to change that, it would take us tree committee members, just lobbying council members to say, hey, can you change this priority to actually be a broader overhaul of tree policy, which I think is more reflected in the spirit of what planning wants to do, is kind of update that. And Cindy, I can tell you're...
Sorry to step in. I'm chair for me just to say item 7 is the discussion of formation of the communication ad hoc outreach. And that was what we will discuss the functionality of that. I think you're framing it, but maybe it's just worded differently on the agenda for today.
And that's actually a great point. I wasn't sure if the outreach ad hoc was more of public outreach, or is that kind of communicating with everyone
That was mirrored and brought to the committee to mirror the one that the Airport Commission has, which is
Right.
more of an internal group that reaches out to council, other committees, commissions, and boards. So that's why it was being brought forward and agendized.
Do you think it would be redundant to have a policy ad hoc or focused on just this ordinance part? Because I feel like that's such a big process.
I think you can discuss it in the
Okay.
item
Okay.
7 and see where you guys want to go with it.
Keeping us on track. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. Yeah, we're getting time here. I just wanted to say, everybody said great comments. And in my mind, that the city arborist, if we were to have a city arborist, it would be somebody to go around and assess trees. And so if somebody wanted to take out a tree, then the city arborist would go and say, okay, you can take out that tree, or you can't take out that tree. Or if somebody had a sick tree, the city arborist would say this tree can be revived or this tree needs to go, that sort of thing. But I think design, as far as the arborist goes, the design should not be part of their scope. I think they should be, as far as design goes, I think they should be in an advisory capacity, but not in anything else. I just had a situation where in Belvedere, I've had some trees come down. And certainly I could take the one that down, I could take it out. But then the rest that were, I already had a consulting arborist look and recommend for these trees to come down. And the owner had a recommendation for the trees to come down. But then Belvedere made me give them $375 to have their arborist come and make sure that those trees can come down. So, we could have something like that, so that consulting arborist is actually getting paid for by someone like that. And mine was actually, because in order to take those trees down in Belvedere, I would have had to go through a review board and then get a permit for doing it. So this was sort of to kind of supersede that, because I needed to get those trees down. And so there's lots and lots of different ways that this can be approached. I do like the idea of the tree ordinance ad hoc committee really being super involved. I don't know what the Brown Act says about sort of an email thread between all of us. So as a way to kind of keep us updated more than just once a month, and then perhaps we can all learn and expand on whatever's going on in those 3 weeks or those 4 weeks, but then actually bring relevant things to this committee, so we're not taking up a lot of time discussing stuff that we could be discussing all month long. And I think this is important. I think this is important enough to do that. Whether or not it's a discussion of this formation of the community outreach, we can talk about. And that was all my comments. Thank you. Do we have any public comment? Not having public comment, move on to approval of the approved street tree list ad hoc committee, which I admit we haven't met. We've had some people out of town and stuff, so I'm hoping that we'll meet in the next couple of weeks and move forward on that. So I ask for public comment on that. Not seeing any. And discuss possibility of including a tree of the week, month in the weekly update. Then does anybody have anything that they'd like to say about that?
No, and this comes from you, Chair Formby. It was an idea you brought and you wanted to agendize. So this is
Yeah.
coming back to the committee. If you have any interest to, with our city updates that go out weekly, or if you want to do monthly, how that would look like. Is there anybody on the tree committee that would like to take charge of that? I can help, kind of work with the communications team to make it happen. I think it's an interesting thing to do. I would love to see it there, but what do the committee members think?
Well, I'd just add on to that. I mean, it's because I see these sort of weekly things come up from the city. There's these outreaches on, I guess, Fridays, I think they come. And it seems if we were to go, as Roger said, with an education, we have the tree of the month, but we can also have an educational outreach within that format. And so this is why you want to plant this tree. This is why so heating, cooling, the street tree value, the value of leafy neighborhoods. I know from just on a personal note, my dad, who's, been here since 1972, has always been like, you can't plant those trees up next to the house. It doesn't look good. But then at the same time, he'll go to Ross and look at all these great houses and like, isn't this lovely? And all these great big trees and everything. It's like, well, actually, if you want that, that's what you have to do. But there's a disconnect there. And so that's where the education can come in.
So if the committee would like me to do some background information to see how we can make this happen, I'm happy to do that and bring it back to the committee members next meeting to see how we can actually format it and make it happen.
I would like that.
Okay.
One thought, Howard, to add to your, is it maybe we celebrate whatever the trees are on the street tree list now and say, here's the, here's the rollout of the list, and one by one you celebrate the values and advantages and.
Oh, that's I think it's what you're saying is that when we get the new approved street tree list, we sort of launch it in that fashion. I think that's a really great idea.
And also just for thought, possibly taking the heritage trees and maybe interspersing those as well.
Yeah.
Might be a really nice way to highlight those trees.
To highlight those trees, especially that one that's coming down in Henry Park.
PG&E.
Before the celebration, we should have a burial ceremony or something.
That wasn't my fault.
I know it's not your fault. Thank you.
I just say I love that idea. And I was going to say, including heritage trees, street trees, I think it's great.
Yeah, and that one in Prince Park, which is my big thing. All right, and so then any public comment on this? I'm not seeing any. We'll move on to item number 7, discussion, information, communication, and outreach ad hoc committee.
So I brought this to the agenda because this was from the committee the last meeting. I know we were running a little short on time, but there was a request to have formation of an ad hoc committee for communications and outreach. And this was modeled directly after the airport commission. So I think a lot of what the discussion was and the comments to the final update on the ad hoc committee for the tree ordinance, I think could fit here because the intent, I reached out to the airport commission staff liaison to see what the intent of their ad hoc was, and it's really to allow for an ad hoc committee to form to reach out to other committees, commissions, and boards, council, departments, and the charge of that is to get information or work with other groups to bring information back to the committee and to give information out. I think the work that the committee here wants to do could be done in the guise of this. And that, I think that was the intent, but I would say it's up to you if you really see this as not like that and something else where you want to do communications outwards facing right to the community, if the committee has the bandwidth to do that. So just to remind you, you do have the street tree ad hoc. I'm trying to think, there's a street tree ad hoc now that the policy's falling off, but there's four ad hoc committees without the tree ad hoc. So this would be adding a fourth and possibly a fifth. So just asking committee members to think about how you want this to run. Does this make sense, or can you maybe combine both? And could this one ad hoc do all of it, right? Both outward facing and maybe the internal facing as well. And the one thing is, Chair Formby brought this up, the ad hocs really go out and do the work, right? You can't have more than a majority of the members on it because that's a Brown Act violation. But then they bring that information back and report out to the committee members, because really we cannot have communications outside of our regular committee meetings or ad hoc committee meetings, whether in person, phone, text messages, or emails, right? That's a direct Brown Act violation. So, but I think that's why the group brought this up, right? You wanted a vehicle to, number one, keep in contact with other commissions, committees, and boards, help the tree ordinance policy along and keep that information flowing back to the committee, even though maybe they haven't brought the draft form or even notes, right? So you would have a group that could do that. But really up to the committee how you want to shape this. I'm happy to support what you need.
Good turn.
Thanks for that. That's helpful. I have an idea. Okay, so right now we have a relief one, which I think we're going to talk about at some point. I'd say hold on to that, expand that to include other things like the Paula Lane Action Network and other open space type things. And then add the communication one, because I'd like it to reach out to folks like, pardon me, Susan, maybe, if I got your name right. Carolyn. Sorry, Carolyn. to help start this culture shift within the community work and to kind of put a toe in the water to see how we can start building sentiment or awareness and consideration and emotion in the community to care more about trees. Have the one on the ordinance, and then the Arbor Day one is going to be dropping in just a month, right? A month or 6 weeks. So that would actually mean that we would only have 3. And given that we only meet once a month and we only meet for an hour and a half, and we're also passionate up here, I think it'd be good to have these ad hocs personally. I don't want to create any more work for you, and I'll get to that later in my comments. But I feel like it's almost like we got 3 pillars that are really important to a stool here that's really going to serve us well to be effective. Thank you.
Thank you, Taryn. I'd just say that I brought this up earlier because of that development on the river, and that nobody had seen that plan, and we hadn't been involved at all. And so it seemed like that there needs to be some sort of better integration between planning and us. And we are the tree advisory committee, so we should see these projects that come through with trees. And the other thing I say about ad hoc is that it's been beneficial to me to putting together this street tree list ad hoc, is that we get to invite other people from outside of this committee. So I think the rule is that they can't outnumber us, like was Roger and myself, and then we have 2 others. And so with that in mind, if you have two or 3 people on this item number 7 ad hoc, then that means that you can pull in other people as members of that ad hoc, I think relevant to whatever it is that you're reaching out to. So if you're reaching out to this for the tree ordinance, we bring in, a consulting arborist or something, you invite somebody that's knowledgeable about these things onto that committee. If you're reaching out to something to do with relief or the open space, then you reach out to somebody, and sort of bring them for that. But I think that having too many ad hocs is just, you start to get too many things going on out there. So try to keep it in and keep it concise. I think it makes it more relevant and it keeps everybody focused. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I love the idea. I attended that airport commission meeting for the first time, and that's where I thought of that idea, and I loved it so much. And maybe they do this. I wasn't sure if they're really kind of in the what do you want to call it, in the like forge of policy, like helping to like hammer out policy and getting updates from planning on where are we. That was my only reason for advocating for kind of an independent policy ad hoc. First of all, because if kind of the policy changes are incorporated in this outreach ad hoc, I think everyone's going to want to be on it. So I think to create a separate policy ad hoc lets a few more folks get involved, and I think it really creates a hyper focus and a limited timeline to like December 2024 when this gets out, and could really be a driver for this comprehensive change in tree policy. And also, if we do update our enabling legislation to be involved in the planning process for developments, that same ad hoc could help kind of during that change to advocate for our involvement and ask planning, as a direct, what do you have in the pipeline for us? What do we have to look forward to review? That maybe the outreach ad hoc wouldn't necessarily be as like hyper focused on planning projects, policy. That might be more of, especially if we combine that with community outreach, the outreach is like a huge task. Whereas I thought having a policy ad hoc would be hyper focused on just this project over the next couple of years.
So just to clarify though, because we have a planning commission liaison, that is the role of the liaison. So we would, if we're creating an ad hoc primarily to deal with the tree ordinance policy and the planning commission has not asked us to do so, I think we'd probably first have to ask planning commission if they want us to have that role, because we have Roger as our planning liaison. So it's meant to function as the mechanism, right? So if something comes up here, Roger's role is to take it to planning commission and say, we need to involve tree committee. So,
Okay.
right, I mean, like Rec Commission, right? Mary Kate is not here today, but if there's something parks related, we would ask Mary Kate to take it to the Rec Commissioners to ask what involvement they need from us, right?
That's an interesting question. Can Roger advocate in planning commission meetings, like put the brakes on? We need to involve tree committee. Is that something he's
He
empowered
is
to
our
do?
planning commissioner liaison, so absolutely that would be his role between the functionality of the tree committee and the planning commission.
Let me ask a question. Can the planning commission just say, as a process, that the tree committee needs to be involved in any project that has street trees or proposed trees?
That is something the planning commission could bring forward, and they could absolutely ask for that.
So could we then entice Roger to bring that to planning?
Absolutely, and
Make it a
so when I
policy,
say
yeah.
in the role of the communication, if you had a communication ad hoc, you could form a smaller, right, group from our committee to work on these kind of outreaches. So if you wanted to work, if Roger was on that, Roger and up to 2 other people could, in that ad hoc, work with the planning commission to talk about scope, and that would be really, I think, useful. So I get what you're saying, Darren, but I think if you have it just for the tree ordinance policy process, we just haven't been requested to do that, so we need somebody to ask that of us, if that makes sense.
Well, and I was told by Heather that any member of the tree committee can always ask planning staff too. So maybe a policy ad hoc is redundant, and instead we can empower Roger as our avatar to stop the development project. Let's bring the tree committee in. I love that idea.
Go ahead, Taryn.
I appreciate that you love that idea. I'd like to be as aggressive as possible in pushing on this. I'm sorry, but I have witnessed for too many years opportunities like this that we fought so hard for to get the city to do the right thing, go down this path. The public, which the civil servants serve the public. We are representatives of the public. We are their boss. So I strongly feel, I believe in democracy, and that's the way that this republic is set up. So I strongly would like to push back from paid consultants inviting the people to tell when they feel like they want to listen to the people. I would like us to be bold and to get exactly what we want here. I have seen too many things, okay?
So
South
committee
Petaluma
member-
Boulevard, excuse me?
I was gonna say, I had a question for you. I wanted to clarify. I get what you're asking. So within this item for the formation and communication ad hoc, so the way it's supposed to mirror the airport commission is to create an ad hoc so that you could reach out, right? So that you could do that work. What I was saying that if you do a policy direct one, we can agendize it for the next meeting, but it'll be very specific to that one thing.
Okay, I
Right,
understand
so
that.
if you were to form a communications ad hoc, it's broad in what that ad hoc does, and that ad hoc can take direction from the committee to say, we want you to reach out to planning. If Roger's on that, Roger can be part of that to work, to get information on the tree ordinance and where it's at and how we can kind of step in. I'm just, whatever the committee wants to do, I'm happy to support. I just want you to maybe be able to have enough scope within the ad hoc to direct in different ways between the time period, right? So ad hocs are time, generally, like it's a task and time direct thing. So you can say over the next year, the next 18 months, we want you to work on things that affect trees within the city. But it gives you just a little bit broader ability on things that you can without having to create another ad hoc, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Every time something comes up. That was what I was.
What are your thoughts on this? I'd appreciate knowing. The airport forming an ad hoc to reach out and talk to other committees. I'm sorry, but I think that that's part of our responsibilities on an ongoing basis is to keep close to other committees, keep close to our city council members so that we can do our job. If we just approach this job in a silo, I think we're really selling ourselves short and selling the community short. So how does regular one-on-one communication with other committees, boards, commissions, and the council fit into with what you just said,
So
please?
committee members are always open to reach out to whether it's a, council member, other commissioner, committee member, or staff. You're always within that. But because of the Brown Act, we can't actually discuss items outside of the committee setting, right? And so forming ad hocs allows not more than a majority to go and work on a task that the committee thinks is necessary, right? And to be able to, as a group, leverage that to work on items, right? So if you want to get more information on the tree ordinance policy, you have an ad hoc, you can meet as frequently as you guys define, right? So it allows for you to have that bubble. Whereas if you're individually going out, you can't speak to each other individually outside of the tree committee meeting.
Not each other, but with council
Right.
and commissions and committees and
Right,
boards, we
so
can.
individually, you still absolutely, you're correct. You can reach out to, the council, the committee, the commission. But if you want the tree committee to have this ability to go out and work on items that you see are necessary by the committee, then you cannot do that, and you can't discuss it outside of the tree committee meeting, and it has to be agendized in order to discuss it, right? Whereas the ad hoc can meet different dates and different times outside of the tree committee, and then you can bring it back to the tree committee on what information or whatever you're working on. So it's another mechanism.
I just want to thank you, Cindy, and thank you, Taryn. I just want to reiterate, I mean, the reason that I think this is up for discussion and consideration is to do exactly what you want to do, Taryn, is to give us an envelope to be as aggressive as we want to be. And so that's sort of the nutshell of this.
It does not curtail your individual possibilities to reach out to anybody.
Yeah, but this, as a committee, this allows us to go and be aggressive to planning or park and rec or wherever it is we feel like we need to go.
As long as we can be aggressive and make sure who's boss in our democracy, and that's the people, I'll go for it.
That's what this is for. Thank you.
Let me understand now. I'm a little confused about, if we have I have never met with an ad hoc committee as part of this group, so I have no idea what the communication
Well,
is.
you do with the street tree.
But that's just one ad hoc, but it's not other ad hocs, right? The resources.
Oh, we met with
utilize-
another ad hoc, I'm
I mean,
sorry.
it's just so
Yeah.
confusing. How do you ever make progress? But if the ad hoc was one of these members, so there's a consistent source of direction, it makes sense. But if there's other people back there that we have to meet separately and privately and then bring it back, it just gets to be very cumbersome. And it seems like the simpler we can keep it and more focused with our philosophy, the stronger we're going to be.
Yeah,
And Howard, sorry, Bill.
I guess lost in a lot of this discussion about ad hoc and Brown Act and things. I just want to see where we're at with the tree ordinance and our focus on improving that at the outcome of the tree ordinance. And are we going to now talking about doing that within the outreach committee, or are we going to have a separate ad hoc to talk about policy?
So I think that's exactly what we're going over. And that's why, because I felt like this is such a big policy moment, having a policy ad hoc seemed to be appropriate. It's almost like reviving the ordinance ad hoc to just see the ordinance through. And literally it could just be the only person you meet with is planning staff. Do we have any updates on the ad hoc, bi-weekly, and then bring those updates to the committee, and that could be it. And whereas this outreach ad hoc would be more of, hey, we're going to reach out to many bodies because there's climate, there's transit, bike and ped. I mean, the interface, trees touch everything, right? So the interface that envelope allows for is so broad that I think as we're in the middle of kind of the general plans up in the air, codes being rewritten, having an ad hoc, even if it's like a smaller ad hoc, but lets you bring in outside folks, like it could be a couple members of this committee, a member of Relief, who's just going in, meeting with planning and even if there's no update, just to say, do we have anything else in the ordinance? What are the discussions you guys are having? Have that broad discussion with planning to kind of influence those ideas, come back to this committee and report. Whereas the outreach committee is almost a broad cultural infusion where we're talking to everyone about how great trees are. And I know at the airport, one of the things that stood out to me is like they took the mayor for a flight in a plane. This is like bringing out the mayor to go see Howard's newest project. This is like, look how great trees are. That was kind of the difference in my head. I appreciate what Cindy's saying is, look, let's not double up, make tons of redundant committees, especially if we haven't been invoked to do so. So I don't know if I love the idea of a policy ad hoc, and obviously I would want to be on it so I can just come to planning and say, let me talk to you guys about this and talk with other tree committee members because I love doing that. But does it make more sense to ask planning, hey, can you come and update tree committee frequently? I just feel like they would never have time to do it as frequently as like a targeted ad hoc meeting with them.
Committee Member Rakusin, let me ask you this question. I think Committee Member Obaid said this as well. So individually, you are all welcome to reach out to planning or any staff member. And do you need an ad hoc to do that? And, the agendizing it, yes. So if you want to discuss it at a tree committee member meeting, like that's absolutely, you need to have some vehicle. But you do also have committee member comments, right? So if you're just looking to go, you want to be able to reach out and you want to be able to update every meeting, you can do that. So I guess I'll ask you what you want the ad hoc's purpose to be, right? Because we have to define the purpose. And will that allow you the space to do the work you need to and want to, or will it curtail the work that you want to do? Right? Because you have to define what the ad hoc's purpose is.
Well, and I think the biggest bonus to me was having other tree people with you to kind of go over it as well, go into planning with a couple people to bounce ideas around. I mean, I guess if we don't form a formal ad hoc, technically under Brown Act, we could still have 2 members just go to planning and talk about it, and then in committee comment say, commission member Obaid and myself talk to planning, here's an update on where the tree ordinance is. But at that point, why not form an ad hoc? But I see what you're saying. If it's just bringing back updates, we'd have to define what that role is, and that would only be prompted by planning, right? We wouldn't be bringing necessarily resources to them. It would just be to get updates. Like I said, those share ideas, like, hey, here's all the stuff we've talked about at tree committee. Let's see what you've got. Let's provide feedback. I'm not sure what the best answer is. I just think this is such a big, for the next
It is
20
big.
years.
It's huge. And the dynamic of interfacing with staff or paid consultants or other committees, councils, boards, whatever, and the weight of our significance is entirely different if we're an ad hoc rather than, hey, Taryn and Darren want to come talk to you. Sorry, can't talk to you. I'm too busy for 3 weeks. That's what it looks like when you don't have an ad hoc that has a formal charge.
Sorry, just to keep us on track here, is there a good reason not to form this ad hoc or to keep this it says, final update. Is there a reason not to just keep this?
Because the purpose of that ad hoc has already termed, right? The purpose of the ad hoc when it was formed was to go through all city codes, the IZO, to find anywhere trees were referenced. So they finished their work. So that's why we have to term it. So if you want to create a new ad hoc, right, we just have to agendize it.
I think we would agendize this for next time, maybe.
Let's
form this committee.
agendize this for next time, but I think that, I would be in favor of forming a new ad hoc. I think this is important enough to really stay focused.
Are you saying agendize all ad hocs that we're going to discuss next time?
No, this ordinance ad hocs.
What about the community
So we're still on
outreach
item
one?
7.
The community outreach, I think we just need to pass. Yeah.
So
we can do that, and we can talk
Do that
about
now?
that as we form the agenda for next time.
So
Absolutely.
I'm
but for
in
item-
favor. I'm just going on and saying I'm in favor of having 2 separate ad hocs. We have the outreach ad hoc, and then we have this ordinance ad hoc that really stays focused on that issue for the next year, and really gets our goals and our ideas integrated into that ordinance. I think just from what I've seen about the sort of laissez-faire from the regarding this ordinance from others, we need to focus on it, and make our suggestions. So, can we move on? Okay.
Well, you have not finished the discussion for item 7 that's on the agenda currently. So do you want to move to form an ad hoc for community outreach, or do you want to table? Okay.
I would
So-
like to move that we form an ad hoc for community
second it.
outreach. Thank you.
Now, will you please let me know what you want the scope and the term of the ad hoc to be?
Can we agendize that for next?
So we have a motion on the floor. You want to stay it, or are we moving to, you want to discuss it next meeting? Is that?
I do.
So then the motion is not to form it, correct? Is to bring it back to the
Can
committee?
we make a motion to form it and then discuss the parameters of it next?
No, we need to, when we're forming it, you have
okay.
to have the
I-
parameters.
yeah.
So we
I
can
wasn't
put it on
clear.
the agenda. We can stay it to next time, if you'd like that.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
that would be
Okay.
wise. Because I think
Thank
we
you.
all have a lot to say about that.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you. Catherine, were you able to record that? We're gonna stay that till next time. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. All right, any public comment about this? All right, we'll move on to committee comments. Do we have any planning,
Roger?
Roger?
No.
No, all right, and Park and Rec is not here.
Well,
I-
I can provide just a brief
Oh, yes,
update
please.
for you.
Yeah.
In lieu of Mary Kate DeLuca, who's not here today, the IPM was brought to the Rec Commission last time. That was a major item. And it was put back, so there's gonna be an ad hoc committee that was formed to work through the IPM and the way that it was presented to bring back to the commission. So that was a major thing that I know that our group would be interested in. So that's where that process is.
And now do I ask for
Anybody?
any comments from the committees? Taryn?
Thank you. I have about 10. I'll rattle through them pretty quickly. Number one, I really found your explanation, Cindy, ahead of this meeting for things about how to set up here helpful. I was really not knowing what to do before I arrived here. And it'd be great to have it written from somebody else and that we could just post and you could send to anybody in any committee in the future. I think that'd be helpful, and then you wouldn't have to take up your time beyond that. That's just an idea, but thank you. That was really helpful. Let's see here. I would like to say the general comment we received by both Carolyn and Sue Kirks and Relief are all well taken by me personally, and I look forward to connecting with each of you. And I encourage my fellow committee members to read thoroughly Wendy Jacobs's letter. She's spot on about all this huge money printing going on at the Fed, and we can get some of that and really be happy about all the inflation that results from it. Sue Kirks, I am going to take her up on a tour of the Paula Lane Action Network. I've been hearing about that amazing work that she's been doing, and I think that we should pay a little bit more attention to such devoted work to protect an endangered species in our own town. An update on synthetic turf. There are 3 fields planned to go in up at East Washington, but there's yet a 3rd install at Lucchese Turf going in of a forever chemical turf. They only last 7 or 8 years. They're not recyclable. It is like the carbon footprint from hell, if I can say that on the dais. So that's happening right now. It just went out for RFP, but there is a groundswell of community opposition to this for a huge, great reason. It's just ridiculous we're considering this. But please plug into that. Please talk to city council members. We need to choose natural grass. I've done the cost benefit analysis. After the 3rd install, you quickly see synthetic turf is a disaster and more expensive. I would like to encourage us all to engage across committees, commissions, councils, boards. I feel like we need to actively seek synergistic opportunities to move this town. We've got a lot of great momentum with great new people on boards and commissions, and I really appreciate that, and I'd like to amp us up. Let's see here. F Street. I've been in touch with some of the F Street people out of Cool Cities or Cool Blocks. They want to install trees, and it looks like they're going to connect with, Cindy's connected with them. They're going to connect with Relief to get some trees planted there. Also, I reached out to the Valero gas station on East Washington simply because my husband and I have been walking by there for months, and a tree was knocked over and it had not been replaced. And my reaching out to them to offer free help, just as a citizen, was well received. Also got them to get their gardener to give it love. So please engage with community members when you see opportunities. It does make a difference. Let's see here. And finally, and most importantly, I would like us to really put some hard thought into how we can make Cindy's life easier, get her the resources she needs. Monday night at City Council, or was it? Yeah, Monday night. I called out a way that our park commissioners have been saying that they want to give Cindy more staff, more budget by simply changing the accounting around rental fees of natural turfs, which right now go to the general fund. Do not go back to Cindy's team. Do not go back to Parks and Rec. Unlike synthetic turf, which turns into this repeat purchase model, fully funded, let's just pollute the earth with forever chemicals. So we need to really put on our thinking caps. Cindy deserves more help. She deserves more staff. She deserves more accolades. She's been an amazing partner. And please put in as much thought and enthusiasm to help her. It's not fair for us to have all this ambition and passion and ideas without picking up the slack to give her what she needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Taryn. Darren?
I just had a quick comment, and yes, I love Terrence's call to action. Like I said, May is when we're going to have our city budget workshop. You know, the budget now is in a great format. It hasn't always been, but now it's in a great format of what money is being bookmarked where. So it's a great opportunity to advocate for certain positions. And then I actually just recently been in contact with the head of the U.S. Forest Service Sentinel Tree Network. This is an interesting program, actually really designed to target early identification of of phytopathogens, so fungi, bacteria that affect trees. There is federal money behind this. If your city, and they're starting in California actually, if your city signs on to join the Sentinel Tree Network, you're basically monitoring not our native trees, but trees from elsewhere that have been planted here. You start monitoring them for pathogens that may emerge to give us better insights of what different trees moving to different environments, what they encounter, how they're affected by disease. And there is federal money that goes along with that. The one sticking point is they do require the city have an arborist to interface with. But I would love to, and I'll talk with Chair Formby and Cindy. I would love to maybe have him give a presentation. I've had him on my radio show, and I'd love to have him give a presentation about the network, because when I heard about it, I was like, oh, we should do this. So anyway, a preview of coming attractions maybe.
All right, thank you. I have nothing. I think this has been great. I love the passion up here, and I'm happy to sit in this chair. And I'll turn it over to staff comments.
Thank you. I just, very few comments because I gave the IPM update to you all, and, Arbor Day will be moving forward. Our fund is still there. There's no changes. We still have just over $11,000. So if there's something that this committee wants to do related to trees, you do always have that fund to tap into. So if there's something you're thinking we need to do, then it's important, and you want to agendize something, please let me know. But just really grateful to be back in council chambers and on the dais, and good to see everybody in person. So thank you.
I'll respond to that. Just as a thing, we can throw this out for next month. That oak tree in Prince Park. I had an arborist look and overseed or supersede whoever the arborist was that recommended taking it out. But he also recommended putting down a good layer of compost and 6 inches of mulch on top of it to really get those roots, because it's so compacted from all the things there. And so that's something that's been on my mind for a while, and maybe it's something that we could consider to use some money for, and also get like 4-H or high school kids and stuff involved. But it is going to take some money, so that might be a nice thing. So
I'll put it on the agenda for next meeting.
thank you. And if there are no other comments, I will adjourn the meeting at 5 o'clock.